Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Father Columbus Stewart, the Executive Director of the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library, and I'm delighted to see so many people turning out for a hardcore philological presentation this afternoon by our guest speaker, Dr. Margherita Farina. Dr. Farina is here at St. John's as a Dietrich Reinhardt OSB Fellow in Eastern Christian Manuscript Studies. This is a fellowship made possible by the generosity of former Himmel board member Jean Manas and his wife Rebecca Haile, who is the daughter of our longtime, now retired Ethiopian cataloger Katachu Haile. And she is this semester as well a fellow of the College Bell Institute. And as always, we thank the Institute for its partnership in this new fellowship program. Dr. Farina is known to many of you already as someone who represents a great lineage of classically trained philologists, a tradition which survives in very few places in the world today, but Italy is one of them. Her education largely in Pisa, her most recent appointment as a researcher in Siena, her involvement in a number of linguistic traditions with expertise particularly in Semitic linguistics and philology, but also branching out into other areas. So there's a good Latin and Greek foundation. There's substantial work in Hebrew and Arabic, particularly in Syriac, as we'll hear, but also, as her CV reveals, basic knowledge of Ugaritic, ancient South Arabian, Akkadian, and Sanskrit. And you're probably working on something else while you're here to add something to that list. For our purposes, we're particularly intrigued by the fact that her interests extend not only to manuscripts, but also to early printing, and particularly to the early printing of books in Eastern Christian languages. Some of her work is with the history and the output, for example, of the Typographia Medicea, which was one of the pioneers of printing in Arabic, Syriac, and other Eastern languages, and currently on display in Himmel, in fact, is one of their most beautiful products, the 1590 Arabic Gospels. If you haven't had a chance to see that, it's a really beautiful book. She's co-edited several volumes, and I happen to have a couple of them here, Comparative Ancient Grammars, and then a book which is about the work of the Medicean Press and its connections between the East and the West, and these will soon be in the Himmel reference collection. She's also publishing her doctoral dissertation, which is an outline of the middle voice in Syriac, evidences of a linguistic category, the kind of thing that makes the pulse of a philologist beat just a little bit faster. And this will be coming out with Gorgias Press in New Jersey.
It's out, actually.
It's out? Okay.
You have it.
We do have it, and my pulse obviously doesn't beat faster. so it's here on the shelf. Published by Gorgias Press, which is a partner with Himmel in all kinds of work involving manuscripts and publication. Numerous articles in progress. We have a very talented, promising scholar who has recently also received her official accreditation in the complex Italian academic system, which qualifies her for an academic post. In some parts of Europe, it's not enough to have a doctorate. You need the kind of next level of professional accreditation, and she has received that. So with all of that background, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Farina, who will speak to us about the grammatical work of one of the greatest Syriac writers of all time, Barhebraeus, or Barhebraeus, whom she will introduce to us this afternoon. Margherita.
So you're going to see a lot of me dancing around here because I don't really have a place that is confined. Sorry about that. And it is, I wouldn't want to disappoint you, but it's not going to be really hardcore philology, so once you thought we were going to have a nice nap, that won't really happen. And I would like to thank, first of all, Father Columba for his very generous presentation, but most of all for having me here this semester and for this great opportunity that I had from the NEO to study the wonderful collection of Syriac manuscripts that they have digitized. And as my time is running out, I would like also to thank the College and Institute, staff, and my beloved friends here, who made my stay so pleasant and stimulating. So we're going to talk about Barhebraeus' metrical grammar, and also about the manuscript tradition of this text, especially the oldest, dated extant copy of it that I'm working on. And also a little bit of the history of how this text was used both in Eastern and Western Christianity between the 14th and the 16th century. So we start with the manuscript. So the manuscript I work mostly on is Oriental 298 from the Biblioteca Medicea Laurenziana of Florence. And it's a Syriac manuscript that was copied in 1360 by a scribe called Daniel of Mardin. And so Mardin is here, and here's where the manuscript was preserved most of the time before it was taken to Europe, Midyat. The manuscript was restored in 1388 in Midyat, and after this date we start to see many copies taken from this manuscript that are now preserved in the Hymnal Digital Collection, like those two, for example, that I've been working on here. So this restoration in 1488, during which new choirs were added with new texts attached to the original metrical grammar, can be also considered a moment in which the manuscript was recovered somehow and started to be used again and living again. But before coming to southeastern Turkey, in the area called Abdin, I argued that the manuscript was actually copied in Egypt. And there are some reasons to support this idea. Well, the main one is that we know from other annotations in other manuscripts that from 1357, Daniel of Mardin moved to Egypt, where he stayed for 17 years. He says because he wanted to improve his knowledge of Greek. But the manuscript itself carries some evidence of an Egyptian copy. For example, the fact that in the first guard leaf we had a list of correspondences between the names of the months according to the Syriac and Coptic calendar. Maybe some of you can read. Where is it? The Surioyo, the Egyptoyo here, maybe. And so this is one of the reasons to support an Egyptian provenance. Another one is the fact that the manuscript is covered in Greek annotations that are actually transliterations of Greek words that were Greek loanwords into Syriac, and wherever the scribe spotted this word, transcribed the word back into Greek, which is not a really fair Greek, it's just the way the Syriac word sounded like. And then sometimes, like here, he also gives a literal Arabic translation of the Greek term. So this would be compatible with the idea of someone who's learning, improving knowledge of Greek, and while copying the manuscript, using it to just fix some of the knowledge he's acquired. And moreover, the manuscript has this very particular frontispiece. It's an Arabic frontispiece, and it resembles a lot in the structure many typical Islamic manuscripts. And we have an Arabic title here in monumental writing, saying Kitab al-Grammatica. Grammatica is not an Arabic word at all. It's just an Arabic rendering of the word grammatiki, which in Syriac is a loan word from Greek. And it's how Barhebraeus' grammar is usually known. So when you find grammatiki, it's not any grammar, usually it's Barhebraeus' grammar. And now, if we compare this frontispiece with a frontispiece, a typical Mamluk frontispiece from a Quran from Egypt and the 14th century, so contemporary, this is one I found on the website of the National Library of France, just because it was online available. There are very important similarities. So you can see the fact that the text is included in this kind of white clouds, and there is a background with floral motif and decorated with red spirals, the same here, a little bit clumsier maybe. And then the use of these rosettes that are actually punctuation marks expanded. The golden framework in which the title is enclosed, and also then this extra blue frame. And then you see how the Syriac is kind of mimicking the Islamic frontispiece. It's not really as beautiful, but they're trying to use the same elements. And so one would think that the reason for this particular frontispiece is that the manuscript should look like an Islamic manuscript. Maybe because Daniel of Mardin had to take it back to Abdin with himself, and then he wanted to pass customs easier. And maybe a Christian manuscript would have been retained, but this way it looked like the Quran, and custom officers wouldn't be really able to read anyway something complicated as a manuscript. So that could be a clue for thinking why this manuscript has such a very particular frontispiece. And then, after being for a couple of centuries in Abdin, the manuscript travels again and it moves to Europe. In 1577, it's brought to Italy. And again, we could find traces of this movement on the manuscript itself, because this is the binding that the manuscript has now. It's a very nice Ottoman leather binding, which I would argue that was put on the manuscript either in Abdin itself or in Venice when the manuscript arrived in Europe. And so you can see that it has some very typical features of Islamic binding, like the flap, this element that continues the front cover onto the back cover of the manuscript to protect the sides. And the flap has a blind stamp decoration with typical Ottoman elements. And if we now compare this binding with the bindings that I have seen here in the Himmel manuscripts on copies of the grammar coming from Abdin and copied in the second half of the 16th century, they are very different. They have some very characteristic features, like, for example, this element here. So the raising head cap of the spine, as Dan taught me, I should say, is a very typical feature of Byzantine binding. Here is a very well-preserved Byzantine binding, and you see better the shape of this element. This is very typical of Byzantine manuscripts, and is a feature that is taken over by Syriac and Armenian binding traditions. And so that's what a binding like the one our manuscript should have had would look like. So probably a manuscript like ours would travel unbound, because they would wrap them in a way that they would protect them and then carry them unbound. And then the Ottoman leather binding could have been put in place just to make it look more appealing, because when it was traveling to Europe, that was probably the fanciest binding that it would have had to be sold easier. And we could even think that maybe in Venice there were some workshops that were able to put such a binding in place, so it wasn't even necessary that the work was done beforehand. Okay, so that's enough for, well, this we can talk about later, it's just nice. Okay, so let's talk about the text now and the content, the metrical grammar. So it's a grammar that was composed probably in 1265 or 1276, according to the interpretation of some data, by Barhebraeus, who was probably the most important Syriac author of all times, who died in 1286, so 10 years after the composition, probably. And the manuscript, the grammar is very, very popular throughout Syriac tradition. There are nowadays more than 100 copies of this grammar, and the reason for this amazing popularity is probably the fact that it's metrical, and so it's very easily taught and learned by heart. But I guess that another reason for this popularity of the text is the fact that it has so many interesting annotations all around. And the annotations, in part, are already the work of Barhebraeus himself, so they are due to the author, who was trying to explain in greater detail things that in the metrical text were a bit complex or said in such a short way that they might be misunderstood. But another part of the annotations that this manuscript, oriented to 198, carries, and that were copied throughout the Turkish tradition, are the work of Daniel Margherita himself. So if we look at this page, the central columns contain the metrical text. This annotation, for example, is a Syriac annotation by Barhebraeus himself. But these Arabic annotations are the work of Daniel Margherita. And the annotations by Barhebraeus, usually in content, well, they are very variegated in content, but they might be either deeper grammatical observations in the same topic that is treated in the metrical text, or expansions and digressions on, I don't know, some other features of the Syriac language, like dialect differentiations or connections with textual quotations that he's been indicating in the main text, stuff like that. Whereas Daniel Martin's remarks are always comparisons between the Syriac and the Arabic language, and they usually compare more than the simple linguistic feature, they compare the linguistic theory. So they say the Syriac grammarians put this phenomenon this way, but the Arabic theory goes different, and he tries to reflect a bit on how Barhebraeus has drawn from the Arabic tradition and whether he understood correctly or not. He's not very open in that, but we understand that that is what's going on. So I would like to give you a few examples of these annotations, and we can start with the ones that are due to Barhebraeus himself and see why they're interesting. And I just picked this one that is a comparison between the West Syriac and East Syriac dialects of Syriac, in which he explains how it happened that they differentiated and, well, expresses his preference for his own variant, which is the Western one. So it says, one has to know that the Syriac language, more than all other languages, being dispersed and scattered in remote lands, has suffered great confusion. It underwent all sorts of transformations, up to the point that those conversing in the same language do not understand each other, but need an interpreter, just like those conversing in foreign languages. Those are the Syrians, the Palestinians, and the Orientals. And it is clear that it is a refined, literally lordly, and correct language in which from the beginning until our days the Syrians communicate. And in this case, the Syrians, Surioyo, doesn't really mean all the Syrians, but he's meaning, with this word, the Western Syrians. So he's making the point that best language is the one that he speaks. So what is interesting here is, first of all, this Babelic image of the language dispersion. So he's putting things in terms of a sudden dispersion of population for which people do not understand each other anymore, and when they converse, they don't know what they're saying, which is probably not really exactly what was going on. They were probably able to actually understand each other, although maybe some technicalities of language there could be a misunderstanding. The very main difference that could strike the ear of the speaker was the fact that the long A vowel was pronounced O by the Syrians, so the word Surioyo would have been pronounced like that in Western Syriac dialect, whereas Eastern Syriac would have said Suriaya, so the long A would have been retained like A. So that's the feature that he speaks about the most because it would strike your ear, but then there are some other minor grammatical differences. But the other interesting thing, I think, is the very frequent reference to conversing people. Because we usually think that by the 13th century, there would no longer be real Syriac speakers. Syriac Christians would have either spoken an Aramaic vernacular that never made it through up to a literary expression or any written record, or an Arabic dialect or a Turkish dialect or whatever was spoken in the area that we live in, like Iranian dialect. But we usually assume that they wouldn't converse in Syriac. So this reference to conversation might suggest that at least in some contexts, conversing in Syriac would actually happen, and that there might be situations in which you can picture Syriac people conversing in Syriac, in this higher literary language. And not necessarily just liturgical use, because he just says that they communicate in this language, and that they converse with each other and stuff like that. So, okay. Another interesting feature of the grammar is the frequent reference to Greek loanwords in Syriac. So very often when Barhebraeus discusses a linguistic phenomenon in Syriac, then he makes a parallel with what happens with Greek loanwords. And I picked this case, which is a chapter on the derived nouns. So he says the letters relating a noun to another. So like from the word rucha, which means spirit, then ruchana and ruchanaya are two different derived nouns, and he first explains how this process is being done. But at the end of this chapter, he treats the Greek words and the Greek derived words. And so he lists Ariano, Nestoriano, and then Conico, Platonico, Agonista, Evangelista. And what I think is really interesting is, first of all, the fact that he realizes that these Greek words are derived words, and that they would rank just in the same place where Ruhana and Ruhanaya rank in language. And then he also realizes that Ariano and Agonista and Euchanita are the same, belong to the same word class. They are all derived nouns, although they are being derived through different morphological devices. And this is interesting because usually we don't believe that Barhebraeus knew any Greek personally. He might have had the basic knowledge, being able to write a few annotations or anything like that, but not mastering the language. So it means that these loanwords were so deeply rooted, so deeply integrated in the system that he was able to parse them and analyze them morphologically, even though he didn't know the language of origin. Okay, and then one more thing is a piece in which Barhebraeus is comparing Syriac, Arabic, and Hebrew in the phenomenon of an intermediate vowel, like between A, sorry, I should point that, but I don't see it anymore, between A and O, that intervenes when there's a cluster of two or more consonants, like rechmta. And he says that the Arabs do the same as the Syriac people do. And he says that the reason why they share this feature is because of the kinship of these languages. And then he notices that Hebrew does the same. And again, he says because Hebrew is a sister of these languages. And it's a very interesting image because we usually take it for granted that these languages are related and we use this image of kinship. But Western European scholarship didn't use this terminology until very recent, until like 18th century, when it was taken from the Linnean terminology of the biological classification of species. But Semitic people did it a long time before, and even earlier than Barhebraeus, because we can find traces of this already in the 10th century Hebrew grammars. So it is interesting, we could even think that maybe it was not really from the Linnean terminology we took it, but that maybe it was some knowledge of these texts that were spread during the Renaissance and that gave this idea as well. Who knows? Okay, and now comes the hardest part. The hardest part of the talk. So these were Barhebraeus' glosses, but I would like just to give you a taste of what Daniel of Mardin's glosses are about. So we are in the chapter of syntax of the grammar, and Barhebraeus is trying to draw on a very, very complicated notion in Arabic syntax, which is the notion of agent, in Arabic fail. And it's complicated because this notion is, in Arabic, is purely syntactic. So in spite of the fact that it's called agent, it would suggest you a semantic idea of the one who performs the action or something like that. In Arabic, the agent is the noun that follows the verb, so it needs to be after the verb, otherwise it's not an agent, and to which somehow the action is attributed. And it's a very controversial notion, and also Arabic grammarians argue on that, but that's what it is. And Barhebraeus is trying to give some definition of the agent, facing the problem of what the Arabic grammarians call who killed who. So assigning the syntactic and semantic roles of in the elements of the sentence. And so he says in the chapter on the properties that distinguish the agent and the patient, in 5 ways the agent is distinguished from the patient, and then I summarize it for you. So the agent precedes in order, so this is a syntactical notion. And then the use of the preposition le before the patient, so this is a morphosyntactical notion. There is a marker for the direct object that distinguishes from the agent. There cannot be confusion between agent and patient, even when the patient precedes the agent, and this is a semantic notion. So it's like if I say a glass of water drank Alice, I know that it's Alice who's the agent because there's no way that the glass can drink. And then, so this is a purely semantical notion, and then the agreement in gender and number, and this is a morphological notion. So Daniel Mardin reads this and thinks, okay, this is confused. And then he adds a gloss that says, you should know that the agent among the Arabic speakers is every noun occurring after an action, and to which the action is attributed, either positively or negatively, have the agent accomplished it or not. And among the Syrians, the agent is the one who accomplishes the action, and the patient is the one who undergoes the action from the agent. So he says, like, wait a minute, we have a semantic notion of the agent, and it is this. But the Syriac people are having so we have a syntactic notion, and the Syriac people have a semantic one. So they are not really calling the agent what we call the agent. And well, it's interesting to think that Daniel of Abdin, being coming from the southeastern Turkey region in that time, associates himself with the Arabic speakers, although he's a Syrian ethnically, and he was trained in Arabic philology and linguistics, and then he reads Barhebraeus' grammar and he's trying to put the reader into the right direction. So there's something very interesting going on. And this is the topic on which the manuscripts that have been working here speculate the most and articulate the most. So it's very, very important, it's very crucial for them. And they expand a lot these annotations and rework on this notion, quote from other Arabic texts. So I just picked it because it's really important. And this is the end of the hard part of the story. So you can breathe and relax. And because we just now start to think about how these manuscripts then end up in Italy, in Florence, where it's now kept. As I said, in 1577, the manuscript travels again and is brought to Europe. And it's brought to Europe for an enterprise, the results of which you can see when you enter the Bimmel, as Father Columba just told us. So when you enter in the first case on your right, you see this text, which is the first printed version of an Arabic gospel. And here is a chapter of Mark. And the Arabic typesetting was prepared by Robert Grandjean, who was one of the most important punch cutters of his time. Whereas the illustrations, like this one that says Mary Magdalene, Mary the Mother of James, and Salome confronting the empty tomb, is the work of Antonio Tempesta and the woodcutter Leonardo Parasole. So many of the most important artists of the time worked on this on this gospel. So, and the gospel was printed in 1590, and it's the first publication of this Typographia Medicia. That was a press that was established in 1584. Oh, sorry, yeah, these are the punches. In 1584 by Cardinal Ferdinando de' Medici in Rome. So this is just an example of the Syriac punches that are still preserved in the Laurentian Library in Florence, and that were cut by Grandjean. They're kind of very nice. So yeah, in 1584, Ferdinando establishes this press under the pressure and the auspices of Pope Gregory XIII, who actually died the year after in 1585. And the aim of this press was producing Oriental books to be sold throughout the Middle East for two main purposes. The Pope's purpose was to spread the Catholic orthodoxy throughout these countries, both for converting Muslims and for helping Eastern churches rejoin the Roman Catholic Church. Also contrasting activity that had already been going on the side of Protestant churches in those areas. But Ferdinando saw a business in that, because from 1483, printing was forbidden in the Ottoman Empire. So, and actually there is no Arabic or Islamic printing until very, very recent times. So he thought that it was good business to go there and sell books. And they had, during the 16th century, Rome had been in contact with many representatives of Eastern churches who would come to Rome trying to print their liturgical books, because they had very, very little books available in their parishes, and they were dying basically. So they hoped that print would have helped them having their texts spread again in their areas. But all these activities more or less failed, or not really succeeded, until Ferdinando decided to do it the Medici way, and he put an enormous amount of money in that, called the best people for everything, and made the press work. And the press was under the scientific supervision and responsibility of Giovanni Battista Raimondi, who was a mathematician and an Orientalist and an amazing person, who was in charge of all this scientific activity there. So he would collect the manuscripts, he would prepare the, in his way, critical editions of the texts. He would prepare the versions that the composers would need to actually set the typeset for the print, and then check the prints everything was done by him. And he would also pick some of the texts to be printed. So as a humanist and as an Orientalist, he wished to continue the humanistic recovery of classical texts that had been going on the century before him. And so he printed Avicenna's canon in 1593 and the Arabic version of Euclid's Elements in 1594. The first edition of the Elements ever done in the Western world was done by him, and he was basically doing the entire mathematical work behind that. But how did these manuscripts come to him? Just like, for example, manuscript Oriental 298 that we've been talking about. These manuscripts were a great number of these were brought to Europe by Ignatius Namatalla, who was the Syriac Orthodox Patriarch of Antioch, who was forced to conversion by the Ottomans, and so he lost his patriarchal status and fled to Rome in 1577. And he took with him many, many valuable manuscripts, probably thinking that he would make a living by selling them. And so he first worked for the Pope for a while, and he was in the committee that in 1583 produced the new Gregorian calendar. He was one of the people involved in that. But then he started to work for Ferdinando, providing these manuscripts. So our manuscript in the inside cover has the annotation that made by Raimondi that the manuscript is coming from the Patriarch, Monsignor Patriarca, and it is a Chaldean grammar, it says. Okay. Another way to collect manuscripts was through merchant travelers that were sent off through the Middle East in missions, both commercial and diplomatic. So these people had to collect manuscripts and to send them back to Europe or take them back when they would go back, but also to reach representatives of Eastern churches in Ethiopia and in Syria to trade, to discuss the reunion with the Roman Catholic Church. And some of them, like Girolamo Vizchetti, even had to go to the Persian Shah to talk about a possible alliance with the Pope against the Ottomans. And his trip was quite amazing, because you can see he started from Venice and he traveled through the Mediterranean, the entire Middle East, the Persian Gulf, Hormuz, Nieta, Binagar, and Taj Mahal. And that's it. Not all of them came back, but he did. So behind this press, there was an amazing world, an amazing activity going on there of people being able also to recognize such very, very valuable manuscripts. Because one thing that is striking of the collection that eventually ended up in Florence and partly in Rome and Paris is that most of these manuscripts, like my manuscript, are the best copies extant in the world of the text that they carry. Either the oldest copies, or anyway the best. So these people were also able to recognize the text and their value, and this is really amazing, because they were no philologists, they were merchants. So what do the grammars have to do with it? And we head to the conclusion. The grammars were essentials for Raimondi's work, because through these grammars he would master the skills to be able to produce critical editions. So he made a copy for himself of our manuscript, Oriental 298, which is this one, in which he put a literal interlineal translation in Latin and also a transcription of the pronunciation of the words. But grammars were also printed by the press to support the books that they were selling, because Westerns would buy Arabic grammars to be able to read Avicenna's canon. Many doctors were interested in that, because it was a book that was used for basic medicine at that time, and the Latin version had many uncertainties, and so they would be willing to learn Arabic to be able to heal their patients. We have letters testifying that. And another goal of these grammars, and it is the case for the Syriac grammar, the first Latin grammar of Syriac ever produced by Giuardi Samira in 1596, was to teach to clergy. Because the Pope had also established a collegi in Rome, in which he would train clergy coming from all possible different countries, including the Syriac Maronites. And in the Maronite college, they would study Syriac grammar and Arabic grammar in order to be able to go back to their homeland and in a in the highest possible language, instruct their people in the true Catholic faith. That was the idea. And Amita was trained in these colleges, and then he produced the first Syriac grammar. And the entire introduction of this grammar is based on the annotations in manuscript Oriental 198. So he never quotes it, but everything that is in there is taken from this grammar. So I would like just to conclude with this is one of the frontispieces of the. This is the Maronite liturgical book, and you see the badge of the press with the motto of the press, which is a piece of a verse of Psalm 126. So qui seminans in lacrimis, and you see the sewing hand here, in exultatione metem. And I think this really represents what they were doing there, because it was such an enormous work, an enormous trouble, and actually Raimondi died without really seeing the results of his work. But they collected so many precious books, and they produced such an amazing set of types for all possible Oriental languages, because there's everything there: Turkish, Persian, Arabic, Coptic, Ethiopian, everything is there. And this is still permanent heritage of the Western world, and constitutes the core of most Western Oriental libraries. So I thought that would represent well what they were doing there. And that's it. Time questions. And if there is a question, I'm going to show you that nice thing again. Where is it? This is the bonus word. Okay, this is the bonus slide. I just found it here and I was amazed because I had never seen. This is a cloth that is used in the inside cover of one of the manuscripts. This is from the Barhebraeus. It's not really, this is a grammar, but it's not a metrical grammar. I think this is Barhebraeus grammar. But it's a cloth with Syriac writing on it, and I had never seen it. Well, maybe I haven't seen enough yet. So I was amazed. But it's nice, and I hope that my Syriac friends can read the Wargis there, which is Syriac for George, actually. I don't know, I just thought, and it's also very nice to try to figure out how it was done, because I have the impression that either it was bleached or it was spared when putting the paint, the color on it. So someone maybe wrote some kind of anti-frame and then used it for coloring. I don't know how it was done, but I think it's very interesting.
Batik?
Could be, yeah, I just have no idea, but I had never seen this, and I don't know what would be the purpose of a written cloth. I don't know, maybe in the church, I don't know.
Those sanctuary curtains.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Remember when we did the eggs, the Ukrainian eggs?
Yeah.
You see a resist process of using a stylus with wax.
Could have been done with wax, yes, you're right.
And then remove the wax.
Yeah. Although, in my personal experience, removing the wax from cloth is very hard.
Well, there have been other ways to do it. You can,
Yeah.
Well, nowadays you can iron, or there's just, yeah, not using the flame. Or bleach.
Yeah, I thought from bleach or the other way around, like not putting the color on it, like you said, yeah. Anyway, I just thought it was nice. Yeah. But thank you for the idea of the egg. Yeah. Do I moderate? Okay, because there's many hands.
Oh, I was thinking about, and his name is Daniel Margherita,
Yeah.
if I'm this.
Yeah, Daniel. Yeah.
So, who does he imagine as his audience? I don't
Yeah.
know. And when he's saying, well, they say that, but we say that,
Yeah.
because he certainly at that time doesn't know it's going to Florence, and then, I mean, who's
Yeah.
he talking to?
Well, I think that we should imagine that in southeastern Turkey, 14th century, the scholarly education would have been an Arabic one. So even Turkish speaker, well, their reference culture would have been Arabic. So these people would have been trained in Arabic grammatical tradition, and Arabic linguistic analysis is the basis for everything in Arabic. Okay, because the interpretation of the legal text, the interpretation of the Quran, the interpretation of philological text, and what you need for daily life if you want to be an upper educated class is linguistic analysis. Everything is based on that. This is really important. So a learned clergy person like he was, because Daniel of Mardin also made translations of Barhebraeus' work into Arabic, so he was not just a scribe, he was a scholar. He would have been very, very well trained in Arabic, because that was the school they would go to. And so Syriac would have been learned at this higher level of analysis only by clergy people. So it would be someone who is already trained in Arabic, and because he's becoming a monk or he's becoming a priest, he's also trained in a deeper level of analysis of Syriac. So it would be necessary to use the tools that this person already has to understand the language. And probably they wouldn't be native speakers of an Arabic dialect necessarily, but that would be their scholarly reference language. A little bit like what Amira does in 1596. He writes a Syriac grammar in Latin, and the entire structure of the grammar is the one of the Latin grammar. So he just takes Pishanus and turns it into Syriac. So using the main scholarly reference, although no one would speak Latin over there, it would be just the language of culture. Done?
Yeah, could you flip to a manuscript page?
Yes.
I just have a couple of questions about.
There was one here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got this. Yeah.
First of all, what is the material?
This is Oriental paper.
Paper. Okay. Can you tell me about the history of the production of that page? Is everything on that page written there at one time, basically?
Yes, everything but this. I would say in this case, this looks like a later annotation by someone who was using it, and you can see that the ink is slightly browner here, or it's different anyway. So this page was laid out all at the same time, and so Daniel of Mardin was doing the entire work. He was copying the Syriac text, and then he was copying the glosses, and then he was adding his commentary. And there's the ink is very stable throughout the manuscript. The ink looks always the same. And so the problem with this grammar and studying the transmission is every time a scribe would take a copy, it would simply flatten all the previous additions and commentaries and the differences that we could be able to spot there if we saw different hands. So it's very hard to tell when something is really from the scribe or has been added later, when something has been recopied afterwards. So one thing I'm doing here is trying to figure out whether all these Arabic annotations can actually be traced to the same person. And I would say so, because they were copied very consistently. But because this is the oldest dated copy, I don't know what happened before. So I have no clue of what the tradition of the text was before. So almost 1 century after the text was composed. There is no way to tell. But yes, this text was put together all at the same time.
Now, throughout this document, throughout this manuscript, are there any indications of marginalia or annotations by a reader, a subsequent
yes, a
reader?
few. There are marginalia by Raimondi, so Latin annotations that he made. And actually, I don't have now a picture, but it's nice because after the Metrical grammar come collections of poems by Barhebraeus, and then some membres, so speeches, homilies by Syriac authors, and sometimes very unorthodox authors are being quoted. And so a Western hand across their name and say this is a very big heresy. Of course, because the Inquisition was upon them, and for working for the press, Gregory XIII made a very special privilege for these people in one of his bullets, saying that whatever book they possess, whatever thing the writer do, they will be protected, because they were owing books that were forbidden, and they were working. The critical edition of Avicenna was processed by a committee from the Inquisition, and there is anyway a note in the beginning that says, we are not responsible for the theological consequences of whatever is here, because this is a medicine book. And there's also the metaphysics actually afterwards, so that was also an issue. And then there's one Hebrew annotation, but I think it's still Raimondi doing that, just transcribing into Hebrew some words he recognized. And a very few further remarks by users, but really not even 10, I would say, all in all. Yeah. Yes?
You
You mentioned that the goal in Italy, of course, was that this was a business operation. I was wondering if you could speak to the cost, failure, or
Oh, yeah.
success.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that was a disaster, basically. It didn't work at all. If you go nowadays in Florence to National Library, in their basement, they have like really, really tons of these printed Arabic Gospel. And a priest I spoke to once said me that in the 60s, he went there and got a few of these for a library in a convent in the outskirts, and he said they were just kind of throwing the copies at him, like, take these away, please. Because they really didn't sell many of these books, and something was wrong there. First of all, they didn't have a plan for selling them. They didn't really have a plan for that. So they were hoping that during these strays or during travels, people would somehow take the books with them. There are letters by Raimondi saying, well, I know you're traveling, so can you take some of these with you and see if you can sell them? They were hoping that, for example, the King of Spain would buy a lot of them, and there's a letter by Raimondi to the King of Spain asking, can you please buy some hundreds of these books, and he doesn't want to, because basically they printed way too much. Thousands and thousands of copies in the very first issue. And that was very, very bad calculation. And then what also happened was that in 1587, Ferdinando became the Grand Duke of Tuscany. So he abandoned the clerical status and went to a completely different plan of his life, and he didn't really put a lot of effort into the press anymore. So Raimondi was forced to buy it at some point, so he was covered in debt and he wasn't really able to pay back. And then Ferdinando's son took the press back again, but they were not really interested in the activity anymore, so they didn't help selling the books or anything. But some of these books traveled. There is an account of an Italian traveler of the 18th century who went to Yemen and got sick there, and very badly sick. And a doctor in Yemen healed him using the Nazi press version of Avicena. And then he purchased it, and it is now in Naples, this book. So they were actually still using it, and it worked, because the man survived. But yeah, economically, it was a very a disaster. Yeah, and also because they were producing way too many punches. I mean, they never printed anything in Ethiopian. They never printed anything in Coptic, but they had the punches for every possible language you can think of, and in many, many variants of the alphabet. They are so beautiful because if you take the Arabic Euclid, for example, there's different Arabic characters that are being used. The very tiny ones, very big ones, and most of this stuff was taken away by Napoleon to France when basically passed through Tuscany. Something came back, not all of it, and anyway, there are still 8 enormous wardrobes in the Florence libraries with all these punches. So that was complete craziness. Or very good judgment. I mean, yes.
Margherita, could you go back to the slide with where it talks about the laudatory kind of emphasis on the Western Syriac?
Oh yes, yeah. Actually, the text is a bit longer. I tried to cut it, so it's not very clear, maybe, but there's a lot of that.
I was struck by the sentence. Those are the Syrians, the Palestinians,
Yes,
and the Orientals.
Palestinians.
Have you determined what he meant by the Orientals?
Yes.
Is he talking about East Syriac?
Yes.
Or is he talking about even further, like as far as India?
Oh no, we do know that the Orientals, he's talking about East Syria for many reasons. First of all, because this is not the only place where Barhebraeus speaks about these dialectal differences. I think it's in the ecclesiastical history that he has a paragraph on the dialectal differentiation of Syria, where he gives more details so we know what he means by these 3 terms. And the Orientals are really the Eastern Syriac, and there's also a reason why he's so much concerned, is because Barhebraeus was a Mafian of the East. So he was the representative, the highest bishop of the Western Church in the Eastern Territory. So he was a West Syrian living in Maraga, Tabriz, in Persia. And for this reason, he was concerned with these dialects, because this was the dialect of the people working around him. And also, when in the beginning of the grammar, he says that the circumstance in which he composed the grammar was when he was traveling through these territories and he was conversing with people skilled in the knowledge of grammar, and he had the idea of composing a grammar to make some things right that he thought were not really clear. So there is a very strong connection with the Eastern tradition in the background of this text.
Tom's getting up, but I do have one question about the difficult, the difficult part about
Oh, yeah.
the
Which
aging
slide?
patient. Is so much attention given to this because there's a real concern about confusion, or is it because there's difference?
I would say that, well, in some cases, because then all these topics are not discussed only at a theoretical level, but examples are given, and all the examples that Barhebraeus gives are biblical quotations, in which there could be ambiguity. So there is a reason for that. But also another problem that is connected to it, and I want to go along with on that, is that Syriac does not have case endings, whereas Arabic does. But Arabic, on the other hand, does not write case endings. They are only used in pronunciation, and so only at a very high, and it doesn't use them also in colloquial speech. So you need to be a learned scholar of Arabic to know how to use the case endings. And so part of the training would be to recognize the syntactical roles in order to put the right endings there. So it's a very big issue.
Let me just add a PS about the story of the 1590 Arabic Gospel that's on display there. We think it came here around the year 1900. And my hypothesis is that it was brought by our father Placidus, who was a rector of the Greek college in Rome. When I was working on our book collection a number of years ago, I was delighted to find the book and then to figure out when it came. And we have the accession books in the library, which tells the year when every book was actually formally added to the collection. So maybe actually come a bit earlier than that, but that's when it was formally entered into the Library of St. John. So here in central Minnesota, around 1900, we had this copy of this 1590 Arabic Gospel, which I think says something about this place and also the Benedictine legacy. When we began our work in the Near East in 2003, people asked, why are you doing this? And I could happily point to that book and say, we've been doing this stuff for a very long time here at St. John's. We're just sort of going public with it in a new way. So Margherita, thank you very much for that really fascinating lecture and for your presence among us.